We have breaking news at this hour about financial dealings involving the President of the United States that are now being investigated by federal prosecutors. One of the most mysterious mountains of money that Donald Trump has raised and controlled is the record $107 million raised by President Trump's inaugural committee, the most any inaugural committee had ever raised. Federal prosecutors in New York City are now trying to trace every penny of that money. The Washington Post is now the third news organization tonight, along with the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, to confirm that federal prosecutors in New York City issued a subpoena to President Trump's inaugural committee today, a wide-ranging subpoena, which was read by the Washington Post. In it, prosecutors are seeking, quote, an array of documents, including all information related to inaugural donors, vendors, contractors, bank accounts of the inaugural committee, and any information related to foreign contributors to the committee. The document indicates that prosecutors are investigating crimes related to conspiracy to defraud the United States, mail fraud, false statements, wire fraud, and money laundering. Joining us now by phone is Washington Post investigative reporter Rosalind Helderman. And Rosalind, I read when your report came over my phone that there was one individual in Los Angeles who donated $900,000 approximately to the fund. And so there are specific, does the subpoena mention specific people like that the subpoena is interested in?
Yeah, it's interesting. The subpoena is generally very broad. As you mentioned, it seeks documents in this very sweeping array of topics, but it also mentions this one particular donor and company, a Los Angeles financier named Ahmad Zubairi. His is the one name mentioned specifically in the subpoena. He was a major Democratic donor. He had given a large amount of money to President Obama and Hillary Clinton, and then suddenly in January of 2017, his company gave $100,000 to support the Republican convention, which had been a few months earlier, and then $900,000 to support Donald Trump's inaugural. He's actually the first bullet point of the subpoena.
And why is this subpoena being issued by federal prosecutors in New York City and not Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller?
Yeah, we had done some reporting a while back now that the special counsel had been asking questions specifically about the topic of the possibility of foreign donors at the inaugural. It's not legal for foreigners to donate to an inaugural committee. You have to be a U.S. citizen or resident. This subpoena comes from the Southern District of New York, so Manhattan prosecutors. So that would seem to be an indication that the thrust of this investigation is not being handled by Mueller's office, but instead by prosecutors and kind of the ordinary course of business.
And there's a big difference between campaign contributors and inaugural committee contributors, isn't there? There's no real necessity to reveal who your inaugural contributors are.
Actually, there is an FEC requirement to reveal inaugural donors. So we have the FEC documents that have been released by President Trump's inaugural committee that shows the companies and people they say donated. Interestingly, part of what the subpoena seeks is sort of a restatement of the donors as well as kind of the records that were put together by the inaugural committee in order to file those FEC documents. So it looks like one of the many, many things they're looking at here is whether the FEC filings accurately reflect who really gave to the committee.
Rosalind Helderman, thank you for joining us with your breaking news reporting tonight. Really appreciate it. And what the Washington Post is reporting tonight, along with the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, follows a separate report from the New York Times this weekend that Donald Trump, candidate Donald Trump, requested a $10 million loan from Deutsche Bank during the 2016 presidential campaign. Deutsche Bank turned down that Trump loan request. The Times reports, quote, senior officials at the bank, including its future chief executive, believed that Mr. Trump's divisive candidacy made such a loan too risky. The people said among their concerns was that if Mr. Trump won the election and then defaulted, Deutsche Bank would have to choose between not collecting on the debt or seizing the assets of the President of the United States. The previously unreported loan request could draw further scrutiny from Democrats who are already preparing to launch an investigation into Donald Trump's dealings with Deutsche Bank because of the bank's past involvement in Russian money laundering schemes. Joining our discussion now are two people who have spent years following the money trail of Donald Trump and both have written books about the business of being Donald Trump. David Cay Johnston won the Pulitzer Prize as a tax reporter for the New York Times. He is now the founder of DCReport.org and the author of, most recently, It's Even Worse Than You Think, What the Trump Administration is Doing to America. And Tim O'Brien is the author of Trump Nation. He was unsuccessfully sued by Donald Trump for publishing that book, and he is now executive editor of Bloomberg Opinion and an MSNBC contributor. And David, I'd like to start with you. The federal prosecutors now investigating the Trump inaugural committee for crimes related to conspiracy to defraud the United States, mail fraud, false statements, wire fraud, and money laundering. Who could ever have seen this coming?
It's amazing it's taken this long to get there. Since we found out, Lawrence, that they'd raised $107 million, I've been calling for a forensic audit, a criminal level audit. There's no indication they spent even a quarter that much money on the really minimal sort of inaugural celebration that they had. Who put the money in? Where did it go? And we really need answers to that. So I think it's very important to the public that we learn that these subpoenas are out there, and I'm sure that there will now be a fine-tooth comb run over the books to find out where the money came in and who it went to and why.
And Tim, not surprisingly, one of the crimes that the federal prosecutors are investigating in relation to the inaugural committee is false statements. Right. So they've already been investigating, and others have been investigating, what happened with the $107 million. And it seems as though some of the Trump people involved in this might not have told the entire truth to investigate.
Are you shocked, Lawrence? Are you shocked by this?
But that is, of course, exactly where you expect them to be caught up, is on the false statements.
And you know, it's not just the money itself, but it's where the money came from. Mm-hmm. They also want to know if this money came from foreign donors. And this is the larger issue that's hung over almost everything Donald Trump touched before, during, and after the election. It touched his business. It touched his campaign. It touched the inauguration. It touched the transition. Foreign money coming into the Trump coffers, with questions now raised by prosecutors as to whether or not that was influence peddling. It's really no more complex than that. The complexities are, did his team know about it and did they lie to cover it up? Were there quid pro quos? What were the quid pro quos? How extensive were they? But the fundamental issue here were foreign entities or foreign interests paying money to Trump concerns in order to get favors.
And David, everyone in politics and in political campaigns, the people who know how to do it in an honorable and legal way, know that there are bad donors who want to come into your world. There are people who want to come into your campaign who you do not want in your donor list. And some of them are completely legal to contribute. They are Americans, but you know, they might have had some problems with the SEC or some kind of things associated with them that you don't want associated with your campaign. That involves turning down money that comes your way. Has Donald Trump ever turned down money that has come easily his way?
Did the sun fail to rise in the east this morning? It's exactly right. Remember when Bill Clinton got in trouble because of some hinky character in Marina del Rey, California, who made contributions? And politicians have to police this, and when somebody slips around them, and that happens, the honorable thing to do is you own up to it and you give the money to a charity or you give it back to the individual, depending on the circumstances. You haven't seen a single thing by Trump and the people around him to correct the record here or to express any concern about it. It's because, of course, to the leader of this group, Donald Trump, there's nothing wrong with any of this. What's wrong with you, Lawrence, for questioning this?
Maggie Haberman is tweeting as part of the New York Times report tonight saying this subpoena is huge in scope And what the Southern District of New York, the federal prosecutors involved, what they're looking at, another reminder that as Mueller prepares to wind down, legal issues related to Trump are going to hang around in lower Manhattan for a long time. And Tim O'Brien, there are some legal observers who've said Donald Trump's biggest problems are with the prosecutor here in Manhattan, the one who already has Michael Cohen's conviction and who has already, in effect, named Donald Trump as an unindicted co-conspirator in that case.
Yeah, you know, there's always been this sort of joke that the Trump team thinks they're playing three-dimensional chess, when they're actually just playing bingo, and it's Robert Mueller who's been playing three-dimensional chess. At some time, a while, at a point in points past, he decided to hand off part of his investigation to the Southern District of New York. And this was when he was under a lot of pressure in Washington to define the limits of his investigation, to make sure it was just a collusion investigation or an obstruction investigation, when, of course, the whole thing could become a high crimes and misdemeanors investigation, which would be impeachable. Regardless of the direction that takes, he's clearly uncovered a number of financial problems and crimes in the course of his investigation that he's given to other jurisdictions that are outside the president's reach. That not only includes the Southern District of New York, it's also the New York State Attorney General's office. Mm-hmm. And all of those things, as Maggie pointed out in her tweet, are going to possibly haunt Trump much longer than his presidency. And one of the interesting developments of all that may mean that in this sort of unthinking, embrace of the presidency and the White House, he put his entire family and business in jeopardy.
Yeah, and David, the Southern District of New York, the Manhattan federal prosecutors who are on this case, they are the ones who've already obtained the cooperation of people working in the Trump company, including the chief financial officer. They got cooperation from him during their investigation of Michael Cohen, and presumably cooperation for anything else they might be inquiring about.
Yes, and remember, when Donald Trump got rid of all the U.S. attorneys as cover so he could get rid of Preet Bharara running the Southern District office, in his mind, and I expect Tim would agree with me about this, he figured, well, I've taken care of that problem. He does not understand the integrity of people who are in law enforcement. That doesn't mean they don't screw up now and then and do things that they shouldn't do, but overall, they are resolute in going after people engaged in wrongful conduct, and the ability they have now, because of people like Michael Cohen and Alan Weisselberg cooperating to some degree, means that they are going to be able to put together serious cases if any money was out of place at all, and if they lied about the money. And the subpoena seems to make it pretty clear that there was already some lies told about this astonishing amount of money, $107 million for the inauguration.
David Cay Johnston and Tim O'Brien, thank you both for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.